In this video, I'm going to talk about how do you train with a limited time schedule. And this came from a few requests from some people on my channel, and I thought it was a really good topic for a video. And I do a lot of bike maintenance tutorials and reviews and that kind of thing, but one of my favorite types of video is just where I can just sit and chat about the sport of cycling with you all and just share my passion about the sport. So that's what I'm going to do here, and what I'll do is just kind of give you some tips. You could write a book. In fact, books have been written on how to train with a limited schedule. But in this video, I'm just going to kind of share my experience and give you some tips of how you can train with a limited amount of time in your day. And usually this happens when you are maybe in your 30s, 40s, or maybe even your late 20s, and you have a job and you have kids, and it's just so difficult to get in cycling, but you know how important it is, not just for the exercise and things like that, but it's also really important when you're just cramped for time to have something that is a hobby, a release valve, whatever you want to call it, so that your life is not just too one-dimensional, because there are so many benefits to getting exercise and getting your mind off of work and maybe even your mind off your family for a while, just to kind of get your time and get that exercise and clear your mind. So with a really busy schedule, how do you do it? The first thing that you really need to do is define what your goals are, and along with that, ask yourself if they're realistic. And you need to find out and calculate how many hours per week you can put into riding. And after this video, you may have a few more ideas of how you can squeeze in some hours of training. For me, my training is about 8 to 10 hours per week. There was a time in my life when I could do 20 hours, especially in college, when I was racing in college. I could put in a lot more time. The good thing is, as you get older, if you have a good base, you don't necessarily need to put in a ton of miles to keep your fitness. And so your fast twitch muscles as you get a little bit older will kind of slow down a little bit. In other words, your sprinting and things like that, your top end power may decrease a little bit, but your endurance can stay very strong. In fact, your endurance can get stronger as you get older, as you develop that longer base. So with your goals, do you want to do endurance racing, cross-country mountain bike racing, road crits, road races, cyclocross? Do you want to just do centuries? Or do you just want to ride for fun and stay in shape, which to me is the number one reason for cycling, is to stay in shape and have fun. The racing is just kind of the icing on the cake. So when I talked about being realistic, if you want to race endurance, and you want to do like 60, 70, 80 mile mountain bike races, multi-day races, or you want to do long road races, it's going to be unrealistic usually if you only have 4 to 6 hours of training per week. One reason that I love racing cyclocross is the races are shorter and I don't have to go put in 3-hour hammer sessions. I used to do endurance racing, and I still do some cross-country mountain bike racing, but even in cross-country, those are 2-hour hammer fests. And I noticed that the guys who could put in 20 hours of training a week were making the podium. And it was difficult to make the podium on my limited training. I could still do it, especially with intervals that I'll talk about in a little bit. But I like cyclocross because I can go out and put in a really good couple hours of intervals during the week and put in some long rides on the weekends and be reasonably fit for cyclocross. So define your goals, define what you want to do, and look at your schedule and see how many hours you can put in. And speaking of hours and days, if you're going to be racing, you really need to get in a minimum of 4 days of riding per week, and it really needs to try to be 5, but you can get away with 4. If you go less than 4, that's when it's going to be very difficult to stay competitive. Now, that's not to say you can't do events. There's a lot of people who do like an endurance mountain bike event, who don't really care about placing in the top 10 or 20. They just want to get out there and have fun, have the aid stations, ride with their friends, and that's awesome. And if you don't have the drive to train super hard, or you don't have a ton of time, those are still fine, and I would never want to discourage anybody from doing that. So let me talk about my schedule and what I do. I try to get in 3 days during the week, so Monday through Friday. And during that, I get in lunchtime rides. And I'll talk about riding at lunch in a few minutes, because if you can do it, that's a great way to get in some training. But I do 2 lunch rides a week, so that's an hour each. And then I ride one day after work, about 2 hours. And then on Saturdays, I will get in between 3 and 5 hours of riding. And then Sundays, about 2 hours of riding. And my schedule typically is to do my intervals during the week. So usually it's Tuesday and Thursday I'm doing intervals. They may be long intervals, 10, 12 minutes. They may be short intervals, 30 seconds or a minute, that kind of thing. And I'll talk about some more ideas for intervals here in a few minutes. And then on Wednesdays is just kind of, I don't ride easy, but I don't ride hard. It's just kind of an endurance pace. And then on Saturdays, it can be, I could do long intervals. I might just go out and ride with a group on the road. I might just, go on a mountain bike ride. And fortunately for me, I have mountain bike trails literally right behind my office. And so some of my intervals are on the mountain bike trail. I do like Strava segments. But again, I'll give you some ideas for intervals here in a minute. And on Sundays is unstructured. I don't plan anything. I might ride with a family. I might go out for a 2-hour hard dirt road ride, but I don't schedule any intervals. Sunday is a rest day for me. It's a fun day. I don't do any type of work. I don't do any type of house cleaning, bike maintenance, anything. It's just a family day, and my ride is unstructured. So that's my schedule that I do. Now let me talk for a few minutes about when you can train if you have a limited time schedule. If you're a morning person and you like getting up early, I know a lot of guys who do that. In fact, I know one guy who they do a ride at like 5:30 in the morning for 45 minutes to an hour. So if you can do that before work, I think it's a great way to get in miles. Me personally, I am a morning person, but I don't like training hard in the morning. And in fact, I like to have just my kind of alone time, my quiet time for 45 minutes to an hour, where I'll pray or read the Bible, that kind of thing. Just get ready for the day. So I usually don't train in the morning. Now, if you can commute to work, that is an awesome way for getting in training miles. And it's going to depend on where you work, obviously, what kind of roads and things you ride on. But that's a great way to get in some training. And if you do that, what you can do is maybe just ride in easy going into work, and then on the way home, you might want to do some intervals or ride hard, maybe go a little bit longer. So if you have a short commute, like 20-minute commute, you can go the long way, maybe make it an hour to get home. And that's a great way of squeezing in time. I talked about the lunchtime ride. For me, that's what works the best. And whether you have showers or not at work, you can make it work. I fortunately have showers now in my office. For years, I didn't have showers, and I would just rinse off over a sink, literally put my head in the sink, shampoo my hair, put soap on my body, just kind of towel it off, that kind of thing. So you have to get creative if you don't have showers. And that's for commuting as well. But riding at lunch is great. And what you can do is I usually take an hour and a half for a lunch break 2 days a week. And I just either come in early or work late. So you obviously ask your employer, your boss, if that would work. Usually, today work-life balance is, I think, bigger than it's ever been. So it's a really good time to do something like that, where you go to your employer and ask if you can have a longer lunch to work some extra hours. So flexible hours, if you can do that, are great. So it takes me 10 minutes to get ready for the ride. I ride for an hour, and then it takes me 20 minutes to get ready and get back up to my desk. So the lunchtime ride works really well. And of course, if you can ride after work, that's great. Usually you're not limited by the time clock or things like that. And if you can just try to get in one after work ride a week that's about an hour and a half to 2 hours, that would really help, especially if you do it kind of in the middle of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. For me, Monday and Friday are rest days. I usually do some strength training, which I'll talk about here in a minute too. And then, of course, if you can get your long rides in on Saturday I'll get up and ride at 7:30, 8 o'clock. Some guys I know ride at 6 o'clock. If you can do that, great. 7:30 is about the earliest I usually like to ride. But that's the weekends. If you have a limited amount of time, is where you would get in your longer rides, because it is important to get in long rides on the weekends. If you can do 2-3 hours on a Saturday, that's really going to help your cycling base, or a Sunday if that works out better for you. And speaking of weekend rides, a lot of people ride in groups on weekends, and what I found is riding in a group doesn't allow you to get that consistent ride. If you distilled down your hard group ride, you could probably distill it down to about 20 minutes of pushing hard. Now, obviously, if it's a really fast group ride, like 25 to 30 miles an hour on the road, then that's going to be a pretty good workout almost the whole ride. But if it's the typical road ride, I've noticed, is between 20 to 24, 25 miles per hour. If you're in the front during 25, you're pushing hard. If you're sitting in the back of a large group, you may be pushing 150 watts, which is not much at all. So the key, if you have limited time, is to distill your riding time down to getting in that hard riding. So especially if you're limited on a Saturday morning, I wouldn't recommend doing a group road ride, because again, you might ride 3 or 4 hours and not get much of a workout. But if you could distill it down and have an hour and a half of pushing it hard, you're actually going to get a better workout. But the key is to try to get at least 2 hours on a Saturday or a Sunday. Let me talk about intervals for a couple minutes. And I can't, in this limited amount of video time, go into full-fledged training and things like that. But let me just give you some tips, because like I said, my interval sessions are usually only about an hour, and I do it 2 days in the middle of the week. My favorite type of intervals, or pushing it hard, is to go out and do Strava segments on dirt roads or roads, but especially mountain bikes. It just allows me to get that motivation to push hard. So that's one idea. The other idea is to break out your intervals into short intervals and longer intervals. As you're further out from your event or your race season or whatever, you want to do longer intervals, maybe a little bit lower intense intervals. As you build up to when you want to peak, and you don't necessarily need to peak at the beginning of your season. You might want to peak in the middle of your season or at the end if there's like a state championship at the end of the season, which is what I'm doing right now. So you don't necessarily need to do really hard intervals to work up to a season, but you want to get in some longer ones. Training zones. Again, I can't go into too much detail, but I'll give you the crash course on training zones in case you really don't know much about them. Most people will break training zones into 5. 1 being you're barely even pedaling hard. 2 is what I would call endurance, so something that you can maintain over 4 or 5 hours. That's still it's harder than pushing or barely pedaling, but it's not quite tempo. Zone 3 is what we would call tempo. So your heart rate is starting to get up there, but it's still something that you could hold for an hour or so, but you're pushing fairly hard. 4 is a zone where you're kind of lactic acid threshold, so right at that point where your muscles start to burn, but you don't want to go over that. That would be a zone 4, and a zone 5 would be a real intense effort, something that you could hold for around a minute or so. And some people kind of break those down into even more, but that's just the basics. So let me give you some ideas for intervals. So when you're several months out from your season, what you want to do is just kind of do tempo. So you're getting your body used to riding hard, and you can start by doing 12-15 minute tempo efforts, rest for 10 minutes or so and do another one, and then work up to where you could do a 30-minute tempo. As you get within a month or 2 out from where you want to peak, and I'm not saying from your season because you may not want to peak at the beginning of your season, but when you start to get about maybe 2 months out, then you're going to want to start to do harder efforts. So zone 4, some lactic acid threshold type stuff, and So let me talk about some ideas for intervals for those. So what you could do there is you could do maybe 10-12 minutes, rest for 5 or 6 minutes, and do another one, maybe repeat that 4 times. Start by repeating it once or twice, and then work up to maybe 4 or 5 intervals. So those are pretty hard. So after the end of 12 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever you do, you're pretty done. You gotta rest. Again, Strava segments are good if you want to do some longer Strava segments, some 10-15 minute Strava segments. And then your shorter intervals, some ideas for those are really simple. A minute on, a minute off, maybe 5 minutes on, 3 minutes off. And then for really fast intervals, one of the best ones that I found, it hurts like crazy, but it's 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. Repeat that 10 times, working up to where you could do that 20 times. That's really good if you're doing sports like cyclocross and more intense stuff where your heart rate is really high. Another one that's really good is where you go, it's 30 seconds on, 20 seconds off. And so you start to limit your rest time, and then you can do 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. And those I find are really, really good for those efforts where you're just, you don't have a lot of time to recover. So like a cyclocross race where you're coming out of a corner, sprinting hard, resting for a few seconds as you corner, sprinting again. Even mountain bike races can be like that. So those are some ideas for short intervals. But keep it simple. Some of my favorite ones for cyclocross are also the minute on, minute off kind of intervals. So like I said, the intervals can be done during the week on like a Tuesday and Thursday is a pretty good schedule. And in the middle of my season, I might do short intervals on one of those days and long intervals on the other. Now let me kind of give you some more tips for training. But let me say this first, is you may want to think about hiring a coach if you get really serious. This is the first season that I've done that. I've gotten really good at training myself. And there's a few books that I'll mention here at the end of the video that I would recommend reading. But I'm trying it this year with a coach. And the nice thing about it is it takes the thinking and the planning out of it. And you can let your coach know how much time you can train. You may have 6 hours, you may have 8, you may have 10, whatever. But they'll work with you on your time. So that's someone who has more expertise in doing your training blocks and things like that, working with you and your goals. So, I put it off for years because I didn't want to spend the money. I wanted to spend the money on my bikes and traveling and races and stuff like that. But I'm hiring a guy just for trying it and seeing how it works. So far, it's working out great. Again, it just takes the planning out. So that's something that you could do. So that's a tip. Let me talk about a tip for if you have inclement weather, and that is I would recommend getting a stationary trainer or some rollers. I like stationary trainers a lot better than rollers because with rollers there's not much resistance unless you get like a fan that you can attach to it to give you some resistance. But getting a stationary trainer, I don't like going more than an hour on a trainer. It just gets too boring. But I get the videos, and even Strava has some training videos now. If you get the premium Strava, there are some videos that you can do, and those are really helpful. Some of the other ones, like the Spinnerville ones, are really good. Troy Jacobson's videos, I like those, and I've got probably 5-6 of those. So those make riding on a stationary trainer a lot better. And you can get up in the morning before work and do that. You can, if you have small kids, you can put the kids to bed, so you're not limited by trying to get in training in the daylight. And so that's something that you probably want to invest in if you don't have a lot of training time during the week. And it's also great for the winter time. If you live in a place where your season's coming up but you still got snow on the ground, those stationary trainers are great. Another thing that you can do, I'm not real big on it just because I don't want to drive somewhere to do a training ride, or indoor training ride, but spin classes are good. I mean, I was out in California a few months ago, and I did a Soul Cycle class where they make you stand up a lot, and it was a good workout. I was sweating like crazy at the end of that. So Those are some things you can do. You can try some spinning classes, and that's something you can do on the way home from work, or again, at night after you put the kids to bed, if you can find one at a gym nearby. So that's a tip for you. If you're a mountain bike racer and you don't live right near some trails, you are going to have to train on the road. You don't have to have a road bike to do that. You can find some dirt roads. You can find, if you don't have dirt roads and you have to ride on roads, hopefully you have some safe ones nearby, but you can ride your mountain bike on there. And if you're kind of skittish about riding with cars, put a little mirror on the side of your bike, and if you see a car coming, just move over into the grass. But if you're limited on time and you don't have trails nearby, it's not practical to drive, however you have to drive 20, 30 minutes, even 10 minutes can take time out of your day to drive to trails. So, just plan on training some on the road or dirt roads if you don't have trails right in your house. Another tip for you is, if you don't know much about bike maintenance yet, try to start doing some of your own bike maintenance, because it's going to save you a lot of time, especially those precious hours on the weekend, so you're not driving to and from the shop. And like I said in my other videos, I am a big proponent of supporting your local shop. So I'm not trying to take away business from a local shop. In fact, I say buy your tools from your local bike shop. But I'm learning how to do basic things like changing tires, changing chains, other just routine maintenance, adjusting your cables. Learn how to do that on your own, so you're not taking the time away from your schedule to drive to a bike shop to do that. I'll put a little plug in for diet and nutrition, because I'm big on that. And I'm actually probably going to make a cycling nutrition video coming up here soon. So I can't really go into it, but I will say, pay attention to your diet. Don't get lazy. If you're limited on time, there's no need in eating junky food and then just feeling like crap during your ride. You want your rides to be really worthwhile. If you're not feeling your best because you ate or drank something that you really shouldn't have, so again, I can't really go much into that now, but just the tip is, if you're going to take the discipline to ride, take the discipline to eat right, because it really makes a big difference. And I'm really big on cutting out white sugar. If I eat something with just a little bit of white sugar, it just makes me feel terrible. I'm probably more sensitive than the average person. But it's not worth it to me to put in all this training and then eat something that makes me feel bad. So pay attention to your diet. If you're limited on time, I would still recommend a couple times out of the year setting aside a cycling vacation, even if it's just a weekend where you go somewhere. That's something that no matter how busy you are, you can schedule in time to get away for a weekend. If you can do a week once a year, it's awesome. If you're too busy to schedule in a couple cycling vacations, I'm going to say you're probably too busy and your work-life balance is out of balance. And just kind of do a gut check there. But try to get in some cycling vacations. Those can do a lot for your training. I love getting away in the summertime for about a week and just riding with the guys, whatever. And you get in 4 or 5 good days of riding, and then rest before it, rest afterwards. But that can be a really good training block that'll boost your training. Speaking of rest, this is one thing that I need to mention. Once you get into your really hard training interval sessions, do 3 weeks on and 1 week off. So you'll do your intervals in the middle of the week for 3 weeks, and then for 1 week, take at least 5 days where you either don't ride, or I wouldn't recommend going more than 2 days without riding. I would do a spin day, and a spin day is an hour or less at a very easy pace. So that's important to rest. And what's good about that is if you're limited on time, maybe you can put off some chores and things like that. Even coming up to a Saturday, just put those things off. And when you have those rest weeks, it's a good idea to go ahead and catch up on those. Let me just say a couple things about strength training and stretching. Those things are really important, especially as you get older. You want to keep your core strong, and you also want to remain flexible. So you don't have to do crazy amounts of time. What I do is 2 days a week, I usually do it Monday and Friday, is I'll do strength training. And what I do there is it's about a 40-minute workout where I do some dumbbells and things like that. I got it actually from a book that I'll mention, Chris Carmichael's book, which I'll talk about right at the very end. And so I'll just do some basic stuff. I'll do planks, I'll do some push-ups. If you can do pull-ups, you have a pull-up bar. If you could do that, good. If you're really limited on time and you can't afford those extra 2 days a week, what I would recommend is before you go to bed at night, just take 5 minutes, do a 1 minute plank, so just kind of on your hands or on your elbows, or you just stay flat, and that'll strengthen your belly and your back. And then do some push-ups. If you have a pull-up bar at your house, do some pull-ups as well. So try to get in some type of strength training. Stretching, I actually stretch every morning. It takes me about 15 minutes. And I've had some IT band problems and some back problems, and I've found some things that really help with that. And I also do some hip strengthening. And if you've ever had IT band problems, for years I just focused on stretching with some success, but when I started doing some hip strengthening, it made a huge difference in my IT band. There's a website that you can go to, it's called strengthrunning.com, and the guy has a little workout routine with a TheraBand to strengthen your hips, and that will do wonders if you've ever had IT band problems. But try to get in some strength training and some stretching during the week. And let me wrap up this video with a couple of books that I would recommend. One is the Cyclist Training Bible. There's even one called the Mountain Bike Training Bible written by Joe Friel. And those are really good books to just kind of give you a good overview of how to do periodized training. It'll give you just a lot of training tips and intervals, and those are just great books. And I even go back and read that book maybe once a year, once every other year, and it'll show you how to plan your season. Another really good book that I like is one by Chris Carmichael called The Time Crunched Cyclist. That will really help you just distill down your training into intervals, and he gives some good tips in that book on how to train with a limited time schedule. So that's another book that I would recommend. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully I've given you some tips that'll help you out if you're limited in your time for training. Like I said, there are so many things that you could talk about in this, especially when you throw in diet and nutrition, and you could talk hours and hours about this subject, but I've tried to distill it down to just a few important tips that'll help you if you really crunch for time in your training. Thanks for watching.